Good morning, Nigeria. Welcome to today's newspaper review. I'll be taking you through this segment. First, we'll start with the Matrix newspaper. On the Matrix newspaper, in page 2, it says Nigeria's inflation eases to 15.91% in June, says NBS. Then at the top of the same newspaper, Tinubu to the Deloitte Africa, Nigeria's economy on steady growth. You continue reading on page 3 of the same newspaper. Then on page 3 of the newspaper as well, Senate rejects request to probe PFIPC scandal. Donates 50 million naira to families of teachers, soldiers killed in Oyo's rescue. So the federal government has donated 50 million naira to families of teachers and soldiers that were killed in the Oyo rescue. Then at the bottom of the same newspaper, final forfeitures. Court hands 48 properties linked to former AGF Malami to federal government. The full story is on page 2 of the newspaper. Still in the same newspaper, on entertainment, Big Brother Naija Season 11 sets for July 26 launch. The winner to get 160 million naira. The full story is on page 23 of the newspaper. So for those of you that love watching Big Brother Naija, the launch is on July 26. So get your popcorns ready. Then on page 3 of the same newspaper, federal government set up committee to drive electricity market reform. We now move away from that newspaper to the Guardian newspaper. On the Guardian newspaper on page 6, on nomination of candidates, row over INEC's deadline, compliance as parties seek further extension. So parties are seeking for further extension against the INEC's deadline. The full story is on page 6 of the newspaper. Then on page 3 of the newspaper, in the middle of the same newspaper, headline, inflation stagnates as 15.9% as rising economy prices trigger fresh concern. Then on page 3 of the same newspaper, National Assembly proposes fiscal autonomy for state police. Then on page 3 of the same newspaper, Senate gives NNPCL auditors 1 week to explain 210 trillion naira unreconciled figures. At the bottom of the same newspaper, again, Tinubu defends administration's economy reforms. The full story is on page 7 of the newspaper. Senate rejects PFIPC probe as Atiku slams federal government over 6.44 billion naira World Cup budget. The full story is on page 6 of the newspaper. Then on page 4 of the newspaper, federal government evacuates another batch from South Africa, brings count to 1,490. Then still in the same newspaper on page 30, Education Ministry, NBS begin fresh out of school children survey. The full story is on page 30. Away from that newspaper to the Daily Trust. On the Daily Trust newspaper, Malami loses 48 properties to federal government. That's the AGF loses 48 properties to the federal government. You continue reading on page 3 and 4 of the newspaper. Then at the top of the newspaper, marketers demand revival of refineries amidst Dangote dollar sales. The full story is on page 19 of the newspaper. Then this is from according to suspect report, they said herbalist asked me to kill family of 7. The full story is on page 17 of the newspaper. Find out why and herbalist asks a suspect to kill family of 7. Still in the same newspaper on page 24, federal government launches online birth death registration system. At the bottom of the same newspaper, NECO candidates, official, principal abducted in Kogi. The full story is on page 5 of the newspaper. This is very sad. NECO candidate, official, and then principal abducted in Kogi State. Still in the same newspaper on page 6, 20-year-old commits suicide over alleged rape. This is very sad. 20-year-old lady commits suicide over an alleged rape. We move away from that newspaper to the Vanguard newspaper. On the Vanguard newspaper on page 5, gunmen raid Kogi school, abduct principal, NECO official, and student. At the top of the same newspaper on page 13, food inflation still rising despite drop in headline rate. Still in the same newspaper, federal government NDDC mobilized $500 million Niger Delta Agri Fund to galvanize food production. The full story is on page 28 of the newspaper. Then on page 27 of the newspaper, Southeast has been North's ally. We must forgive ourselves. This is coming from Kwankwaso. Then on page 6 of the same newspaper at the bottom, Nigerian priest in US commits suicide after order to return home. This is a very sad story. Then on page 9 of the same newspaper, NCAA bans pilot who landed plane on Delta Road. A pilot that landed plane on Delta Road has been banned. Then on page 9 of the same newspaper, state police governors can turn outfit into private army. That's coming from Abbas. The full story is on page 9. Then on page 32 of the newspaper, this is coming from Daily. He said funding must be on first line charge. We move away from that newspaper to the Daily Sun. On the Daily Sun newspaper on page 26, on 2027, fresh trouble for ADC amid Amaechi's choice as vice presidential candidate. Then on page 6 of the same newspaper, Rep Speaker on insecurity. We can no longer pretend. The House of Representatives Speaker said that they can no longer pretend on their insecurity. Then on page 6 of the same newspaper, Reps pass bill to extend 2025 capital budget implementation by 3 months. Still in the same newspaper on page 28 as well, Governor Okpebolo condemns abduction of housewife, orders immediate security action. Still in the same newspaper on page 29, IPOB slams Soludo over remarks on Obi's call for Kano's release. Recall that Peter Obi said that when he becomes the president that he will release Nnamdi Kanu, and then the IPOB are slamming Governor Soludo of Anambra State over his remarks based on that Peter Obi's statement. Then on page 25 of the newspaper, ex-NACCIMA boss flays International Monetary Fund's proposed telecoms patrol taxes on Nigeria. Ex-NACIMA boss flays IMF's proposed telecoms petrol taxes on Nigerians. We move away from that newspaper to the Punch newspaper. On the Punch newspaper on page 2, fake agency scandal. Article, presidency clash as Senate rejects fresh probe. Then at the top of the newspaper, coming from the World Bank, they said poverty threatens 91% of Nigerians despite reform. Then on page 7 of the newspaper, Tinubu to attend United Nations General Assembly in September. Then on page 17 of the newspaper, PSC unveils 5,000 police recruitment. Still in the same newspaper, State Police, UK backs reforms as National Assembly lists safeguards. The full story is on page 16 of the newspaper. Then at the bottom of the same newspaper, on sports, World Cup, Argentina beats England, face Spain in final. The full story is on page 29 of the newspaper. Yesterday, Argentina beat England to 2-1, and they are set to face Spain on the final outcome of the football. Then on page 4 and 5 of the newspaper, 6 killed as gas truck explode at Kogi Army checkpoint. we move away from that newspaper to the Daily Monitor. On the Daily Monitor newspaper, Kogi school attack. Federal government has failed to protect Nigerian students. Children. This is coming from Atiku. Atiku Abubakar says that the federal government has failed to protect Nigerian children due to the Kogi school attack, that a teacher was abducted, the NECO official, and then some students were also abducted in the process. Then at the top of the newspaper from FAC, federal governments, states, local governments share 2.550 trillion naira for June. Then in the middle of the newspaper, court orders final forfeiture of 48 properties linked to Malami. Then on page 5 of the newspaper, Senate approves 50 million naira to families of teachers, soldiers killed in Orire abduction. At the bottom of the same newspaper, coming from Tinubu, he said our reforms have stabilized the economy, positioned Nigeria for growth and global competitiveness. That's coming from the president. He said that their reforms have stabilized the economy and positioned Nigeria for growth and global competitiveness. Our last newspaper for today is the New Telegraph. On page 2, 3, and 29 of the newspaper on state police, governors won't solely appoint police commissioners. That's coming from Abbas. He said that governors will not appoint police commissioners alone. Then on page 3 of the newspaper at the top, fell crisis imminent as Dangote moves to dollarize product sales. In the middle of the same newspaper, this is coming from the federal government. They say we've enhanced our passport verification platform, gain ICAO trust. The full story is on page 2 of the newspaper. At the bottom of the newspaper, Ododo mobilizes security forces as gunmen invade SSCE Center, abduct principal and students. The full story is on page 3, 4, 27, and 30 of the newspaper. Then on page 4 of the newspaper, runaway ram vehicle crashes into Air Peace plane in Lagos State. A runaway ram vehicle crashes into Air Peace plane in Lagos State. We've come to the end of the newspaper review. Many thanks for watching, and do stay tuned as we bring you more updates.